From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Welcome to the Library of Congress. Thank you to the Embassy of Mongolia and the Mongolian Cultural Center for bringing this exciting conference to the library again this year. It's my pleasure to introduce the Chief of the Asian Division, Dr. Dongpeng Shao, who will officially start the program. Thank you.
Good afternoon. We are lucky, we only have 8 hours government shutdown. Originally, I was so concerned, we were unable to have a meeting here. And welcome to the Library of Congress, particularly the keynote speaker to we call the 12th International Mongolia Study Conference. I attended 9 3 years ago in the embassy. We would like to thank Mr. Bobat Ocha, Deputy Chief of Mission of Mongolia to the United States, and also the embassy staff and Mongolia Culture Center and its president, Saru Adini Mikmar, for bringing the conference participant to the Library of Congress. Asian Division has a very large Mongolia collection, and also very important collection. The resources is for academic research. We supposed to be one of the largest Mongolia collection outside of Mongolia. And also we have covered 179 different Asian languages, about 23 countries and areas. So we have a largest collection of Japanese collection outside of Japan, and we have a largest Indonesia collection outside of Indonesia. So we welcome all the visiting scholars to come to use our collection to conduct your research in the Library of Congress. And also I would like to thank the Mongolia Embassy to send us 74 books in a different format on behalf of former President Arbok Duji and his administration. These books are here, and we will have a small ceremony to have a presentation. Now I ask Susan Mayheit, she is our Tibetan and Mongolia specialist, to introduce today's speaker.
Okay, thank you. And it's my honor to introduce our 2 keynote speakers for today's conference. Robert McIntosh, MS, is a retired U.S. National Park Service Senior Administrator who received the Service's Distinguished Service Award. He now serves on the board of the Mongol Ecology Center in Ulaanbaatar. Clyde Goulden, PhD, is Curator Emeritus of the Academy of Natural Sciences at Drexel University, and since 1996 has been the director of the Academy's Institute for Mongolian Biodiversity and Ecological Studies. He conducted his Mongolia research under grants from the National Science Foundation for over 20 years. It is my honor to present them for an interesting presentation on the critical importance of science and the rule of law in protecting the integrity of Mongolia's Lake Hovsgol National Park. Gentlemen.
Thank you. Can you hear in the back? Is every sound good? Thank you. It's Dr. Goulden and my pleasure to have the honor to be the keynote at this conference. We submitted our abstract and then got shocked by asking to do the keynote, so we're a little above our pay grade, but thank you anyways. We obviously want to talk about the integration of science and public administration, science-based decision-making in national parks in Mongolia, and for that matter, the need that exists for that throughout the world. So our talk today is focused on Lake Hovsgol, but in your own experiences with different parks in different parts of Mongolia and different parts of the world, the same lessons are true. I want to start first by just giving us a geographical reference as to where we are in the world. Lake Hovsgol National Park is the headwaters of the Selenge, one of the many headwaters of the Selenge in north-central Mongolia, down to Lake Baikal, and it flows into the Yenisei River, which is one of the great Arctic rivers in Siberia. Equally important, just to the west, is the Darhad Valley and the Shishkid River, which also flows north into the Yenisei and onto the Arctic. Lake Hovsgol National Park and the Lake Baikal region is the southern extent of the permanent permafrost, which is very important in the issues of climate change as we move forward. And you can see from the different colorations in this slide, the red arrow pointing to Lake Hovsgol, that to the north is the Siberian taiga, and to the south is the steppe, the Central Asian steppe. So it's the blending or the transition from one major ecosystem to another. In local cultural traditions, particularly in the Lake Hovsgol area, is that Lake Hovsgol itself is the mother sea. Mount Sardeg Mountain to the north along the Russian border, looking over the frozen lake and the village of Hank, is the father, and all life emanated from the father and the great mother sea. So now the rangers of Lake Hovsgol want to kind of take you on a quick tour of the park. This is the entrance sign, the new entrance sign, which was donated in 2015 by Yosemite National Park in the United States. At the time, we signed a sister park agreement between Lake Hovsgol and Yosemite. You can see here in the geographic reference of the country, Lake Hovsgol is that north-central, and the colors just to the left or the west are the three parks that surround the Darhad Valley. The park itself is 1.2 million hectares. It's about Yellowstone and a half again. Various transitions of ecosystems. 70% of the fresh water in Mongolia sits in that lake. It's 267 meters deep. 68 mammal species are known in the park and 10 fish, one endemic. The Hovsgol grayling only lives in Lake Hovsgol. Local families and visitation, which you will see shortly, is skyrocketing, and we'll discuss the impacts of that. In 2013, the Mongol Ecology Center worked with the park and developed a vision statement for the management of the park, speaking to the diverse cultural and natural resources that express the values of the Mother Sea and the Father Mountain, nomadic traditions and folklore, together for the preservation, fully integrated with sustainable economic development. This is the game changer. In the Soviet period, industrial port, export input from the Soviet Union for 1990 to 2010 or so, things were very quiet, depressed economically in Hovsgol. And then in 2014, the paved road from Ulaanbaatar to Hovsgol was completed, and this is what has happened to the visitation. You can see early in the 2000s, very little visitation. Once the road was completed, 2017, almost 100,000 people visited the park, and a spike in international tourism as well. The border between Russia and Mongolia is now open to Russian Mongolians, and there's been a huge spike in the Russian traffic from Irkutsk and other parts of the Lake Baikal region coming down to visit Lake Hovsgol. The basis of any national park in any country is law. Lake Hovsgol National Park was established in 1992. Think about the timing there in terms of the independence, the Constitution, the creation of the Parliament, and a very quick decision to preserve the area around Lake Hovsgol. It wasn't until 1994, still very quickly, in the growth of a new nation, that the law on the protected areas was established. For national parks, it set up special zones, sort of like our wilderness areas. It set up travel and tourism zones where temporary structures and travel was restricted but permissible, and the limited use zones where travel, permanent tourism facilities, and local families are authorized to live or allowed to live. So moving into park management issues, park zoning. This map was done in 2014. The pink area is the special zone, the sort of wilderness zone. The tourism is the blue, very limited areas that are called tourism, and then very large areas for limited use zone. Limited use provides no protection for fish spawning areas, small natural areas, prime grasslands, and the 574 local families that live some or all of the year inside the park, and you can see that number of livestock that they husband within the park resources. In 1996, the Parliament of Mongolia established the International Long-Term Ecological Research Site to join a group of sites across the world important in understanding the biota and general science information about global issues. And this was established in 1996. Research started then and has been ongoing in this area ever since. Unfortunately, however, in the Njingas Valley, which you can see on the map, in 2013, unlawful construction of a tourist facility. In 2014, limited use zone extended 36 miles south from that line that goes across the map, and then the permit for that construction 18 months later was approved in December 2014. No laws were being followed, no standards were being followed in that example. And that, unfortunately, is not the only example. Mongolian standards for tourism development in protected areas were developed in 2013, or a new set was established in 2013, 200 meters from the water, setback from the water, 1 kilometer between facilities. No open toilets, and livestock and tourism facilities must be separated by a minimum of 500 meters. This is a classic example of a local family trying to diversify economically, and it's a challenge, obviously, relative to their standards and what they can do. Here's a livestock pen, an open toilet, and a tourist facility, all within a stone's throw of each other, which creates public health issues, as you can well imagine. In 2014, we did a survey of the gear camps on the south to identify the location of all the camps on the southwest shore. 2016, we came back and did it again. The red are the new camps in a 2-year period of time. When you zoom down on this, you can see that the average separation between camps is 0.27 meters. The standard is 1 kilometer. So again, the standard is not being followed, and the intensity of development is critically impacting, or has the long-term potential to critically impact the quality of water in the lake. Visitor experience. I pulled this off the Facebook page for Hovsgol. Local Mongolian wrote that the place was overrun, it was dusty, it was smoky, people can vacation, but do they have to drink so much? They should drive slower, they should take their trash out. Stop driving on the grass. Local people, this is what they face on a day-to-day basis. Litter, wild camping with no toilets, wild camping, wild trash, no toilets, right on the lakeshore. Waste management also creates plastic pollution, bottles, bags, just dumped into various depressions in the landscape, and over time, from sun and wind, they degenerate and end up in the lake, creating hazards for the fish, creating hazards in any water that's consumed through the bioaccumulation of plastic in the systems. The Mongol Ecology Center Junior Ranger Program did water quality sampling this last summer, 5 test sites. 5 sites found the water to be clear, found the water to be at the appropriate pH, found the water to be low in nutrients, but found the water to contain fecal coliform. The issue is just at the edge of being serious, but it's certainly an alarm bell that needs to be watched. Oil and gas pollution from watercraft, old boats, 2-cycle engines, and public safety is a serious concern as far as dealing with folks using boats on the water. There are more than 70 private operators, unregulated private operators with tour boat type activities on Lake Hovsgol. Park roads, the road on the left is the road from Hovsgol to Hank. The road on the right is an improved road on the southwest shore of the lake. Unintended consequences of this type of construction. They put the road between the gear camps and the lake. Now everybody complains of the noise, the dust, the speed of the vehicles, and the folks from UB and the Toyota Motor Club have found the lake, and this was scary to watch these 6 or 7 vehicles come speeding down that road without regard to anybody. New roads are in the profile of what's going to happen in northern Hovsgol Ameg. This map on the left shows an analysis of the various routes to get from Moron over to the Darhart Valley. The one that is seemingly locally most favored is through the Jiglig Pass, but that is the one of highest concern. The one down below with the Y, the yes, is the one that's being, at least as far as this study was concerned, being recommended for consideration. The West Side Road, 180 kilometers the East Side Road, on the right side of the map, presents similar problems in terms of how to develop what will become an interstate, international highway, not for park use, or one purpose will be park use, but the road will be consumed by commercial traffic bringing materials north and south from Russia. This is what can happen if the road's not designed properly and if speeds are not controlled and the type of uses are not regulated as well. Managing for new uses, explosion in tour boats on the lake, and within the last 2 or 3 years, the appearance of commercially rented off-road vehicles for group tours or for individuals, as well as dirt bikes to take off into the countryside. The way forward: adhere to the laws and standards, adhere to the IUCN, International Union of the Conservation of Nature, under UNESCO Protected Area Guidelines for best practices, science-based decision-making, planning with teams of interdisciplinary experts, involving the community and other stakeholders, and most importantly, transparent administrative practices. We'll now ask Dr. Goulden to review some critical points in the water chemistry, the science of water, as far as Lake Hovsgol is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Actually, every time I hear Bob talk about this, there's something new that's gone wrong. That's very tragic. But everything is going beautifully here. Thank you very much for having us. And I want to start off just showing you a picture from our training program that we had between 2002 and 2006. we brought in, with support from the World Bank and the Global Environment Facility, 18 young Mongolian researchers, many of whom had master's degrees, all of whom were supposed to speak English, so we didn't have to worry about English at the beginning. They lied a little bit, but they knew enough English to convince me that we'd get along okay. On the other hand, some of the individuals in this photograph are Peace Corps volunteers. We were able to have Peace Corps volunteers to come up during the summer months, on their holidays, by the way, and teach English to all of our researchers. Now, let me just say, at the beginning we started with about 18. 2 or 3 dropped out. We added 2 or 3 more. Most importantly in all of this is that all those individuals who completed the program, the 5-year program, and we had, by the way, a number of international scientists come in for training in a number of different areas. All of those individuals who finished the program ended up going abroad for graduate study. And of that, 12 of the individuals returned to Mongolia with a doctor's degree. The rest all returned. All of the scientists, young scientists, returned. And as many of you know who've worked in Mongolia, usually when someone leaves, they don't come back if they can avoid it. And that's not to criticize them. One understands that. But all of these individuals, in fact, you may even recognize some of those from your own visitations. There are more than, obviously, 18 individuals in there. There are a number of faculty from the National University, from the Mongolian Academy of Sciences, and international scientists that, again, we were able to bring in for training and specialty purposes. So just a little background very quickly, and the role that I'm trying to play here is to give you a bit of the science, our scientific understanding of Lake Hovsgol and why it is so sensitive to the kinds of problems that Bob has just discussed. It is a tectonic basin, similar to Baikal. Baikal, of course, is about 22 million years old. Hovsgol itself is only about 5 million years old and was formed during one of the last tectonic phases that extended the size of Lake Baikal, but added Lake Hovsgol, but it's separate, of course, though they are connected by the Siling River, as Bob said. The lake is reasonably large. Its surface area is about the size of Lake Erie. Though Lake Erie is around 55 meters deep, Lake Hovsgol and these tectonic basins are much deeper. This is 262 meters deep. And it's because of that large volume of water, it's the 16th largest lake in the world. Baikal, of course, is the largest lake. The watershed has been a summer home for nomadic herders for centuries. I mean, you probably can go back at least 2,000 years, if not longer, in time, where herders have been coming into the valley there, and it happened, or to valleys, actually. And of course, one of the most important things, and most of you familiar with Mongolia know that often they have very serious droughts. So where do you go to get water during a drought? You try to go to a river, you look at the rivers, and they're totally overgrazed in terms of the watershed of the river during a drought. Hovsgol itself can become overgrazed too, but it becomes a really important place for the herders to be able to take their animals to get water and generally get good pasture. The herders are coming, in this case, from their winter grazing area, which is up in the mountains, and they come down into the valleys during the summer, and then again in the autumn, we'll start heading back up to the top of the mountains. And that is simply because the valleys during the winter are very, very cold. So it actually, you can feel it as you walk up yourself. You're 4 to 5 degrees warmer as you go up towards the top of the mountain. And you can see also in that picture, by the way, they're carrying their gear, all of their possessions on the back of yaks here. And then you can see in the background up above the sheep, goats, cashmere goats, and other animals coming down the valley. Most herders will have at least 4, possibly 5 different species of animals that they have in their herds. And in general, what you'll see is that the goats, the cashmere goats, and the sheep are grazing up on slopes. Horses and yaks are down below, down near the river. So they're actually separated ecologically. So even though you have a number of fairly large herds, they really are sort of exploiting as much of the slope environment as they can. The problems that Bob has alluded to in terms of construction are really mirrored, of course, in the ecology, the ecological changes that are occurring now. And what we're seeing now is that more and more of the watersheds, as they're being developed for these ger camps and the shoreline of the lake, that those areas of the lake that are closest to the shore are starting to have very serious blooms of algae. This is the kind of problem that most people don't think of as a serious problem at first, but as it expands and those areas become more and more polluted, which is really what this is all about, people become less and less interested in going there. You don't want to have to go to a lake and get out and take a shower afterwards so you can clean all the scum, the algae scum, off of you, and yet that's starting to occur more and more. Another aspect of that, that's a problem with nutrient loading, a lot of it from trash and any erosion coming off of the landscape. And I'll explain what that problem is in a minute. But the other part is that with rapid warming, due to climate change, the whole area has already is warming 2 to 3 times faster than we are warming with climate change. We talk mostly here about a 1 degree warming over the last 40 or 50 years. In Mongolia and in parts of much of Siberia, you're really talking about at least a 3 degree warming. And a lot of that is simply because the snow is melting very rapidly, so that rather than sunlight being reflected back by the snow, so the heating is sort of reflected back. In fact, now that heat that's coming from the sun is being absorbed by the landscape. And that's why the warming is occurring much more rapidly. And then finally, as I mentioned, the increased trash accumulation. So I'm going to focus on those 3 points here very quickly. Mongolia is generally known, to begin with, as the Blue Pearl of Mongolia. Have any of you heard of that before? I just wondered, because I started there in 1994, and that was the first thing I learned. Mongolians love pearls, to begin with. I'm pretty sure I'm saying that correctly. And so when they say the blue pearl, you can see why. It's really a gorgeous color. The water is so clear, and what happens is that as you know, a rainbow has all of the spectra of colored light in it. But as light goes down through, that sunlight goes down through water, different wavelengths, different colors are being absorbed and removed. And the one wavelength of light that goes the deepest is blue light. And then that is reflected back to the sky. And the lake, in other words, as the ocean, is so clear that the light that comes back to you when you look down on the lake is that blue light. Everything else has been filtered out. The reason I mention this, of course, is This is what we want it to look like. This is what you want to see when you get there. But the question is, are you always going to be able to see it? The concept of pollution that we refer to in water, and lakes in particular, such as the Great Lakes, we don't really talk about pollution, though we could, but there is a term, eutrophication, that I think many of you perhaps have heard of before. Eutrophication is a phenomenon where a water body is shifting from a low productive, low nutrient system with very clear, clean water to a more polluted water where nutrients are coming in, stimulating algae growth. That algae growth in turn builds up a large plant biomass in the water, so it clouds the water, and then when that bloom dies out, it falls to the bottom into the sediments of the lake, and then that begins to decompose, especially in a lake like Hovsgol, where you have a lot of oxygen already present in that bottom water. That plant material, dead plant material, is decomposing, and taking up oxygen, drinking oxygen continuously. And so it's grabbing the oxygen out of the water, and slowly these kinds of lakes that are undergoing eutrophication become more productive. What happens is that the mud itself loses its oxygen. The water above it loses oxygen. And when that happened, the nutrients that have been suspended in the water column, and particularly a nutrient like phosphorus, that has gone down to the bottom, remained in the sediment under these high oxygen conditions. When it loses that oxygen, that phosphorus especially, some nitrogen, but particularly phosphorus, now can emerge from the sediments. And it comes back up into the water and fertilizes the growth of algae. So that what basically is happening is that as you're undergoing this gradual increase in productivity, increase of growth of plant material in the water column, it is then regenerating itself, recovering those nutrients, bringing it back up into the water. And so you not only have the influx of nutrients from the watershed, but you now have an influx, as it were, from the sediment. So it's a reinforcement effect that builds up very quickly. And this really increases. The lakes that you've seen maybe in here in Virginia or no, we're not in Virginia, sorry. In Pennsylvania, where I come from, in Kansas, in Indiana, where I've studied lakes before, you start to get ponds, especially Michigan, or Lake Erie, many of you know. Remember the description of Lake Erie? Lake Erie is dead. What did they mean by that? What they actually meant, obviously the water was there, the basin was there, it's all there, but you don't find very much life in many areas of the lake. And it's that living material, of course, that has died, has released its nutrients. They've gone back up in that reinforcing kind of change that is going on. And but it chokes out the oxygen so that many of the organisms present, fishes, etc., are dying. It's a very serious problem, and that's why Lake Erie was said to be dead, though it's not. And hopefully it's starting to return, in fact, but it's reversing itself again. So what are the kinds of problems that are causing this? Water quality studies of the tributary streams that we did in 1999 to 2000 found that livestock grazing itself, this is before tourism really built up, livestock grazing itself is fertilizing algae and plant growths, as I just described, mostly in the bays or in the nearshore areas. Those are the areas that are being hit first. And of course, those are the areas that tourists want to spend their time in. The increased photosynthesis then increases, and this is an interesting point, but it can end up increasing the alkalinity of the water. And when that alkalinity in one bay that we measured, if you know the pH scale, neutral is around 7, and you go up to 10, you're really in a very alkaline situation, or you go down to 4 or 5, you're in a very acid system. We found one area, one bay, with fish kills with a pH of 9.8. I won't go into the reason for that, but if anyone wants to know, we can discuss it. One of the really key points to understand about Lake Hovsgol is that most of the geology in that area consists of dolomite, sort of a limestone, slight variation on the theme of limestone. But this dolomite is very rich in phosphorus. And again, phosphorus is a major nutrient, if not the major nutrient, limiting this plant growth in lakes. So the whole effect of the watershed coming in, the nutrients from the watershed coming in, going into the sediment, being regenerated back up into the water, is being reinforced overall by half of the watershed of Lake Hovsgol consisting of dolomite that is loaded with phosphorus. Anything that is done in the lake almost without care is going to end up being a problem in Lake Hovsgol. The issue on this, of course, I said unregulated as a point there. The lake is very sensitive. If it is regulated with the kinds of things that Bob was talking about, you don't have to end up with this kind of a problem. If those ger camps keep being built the way that they were described, you can imagine what's going to happen. It's going to be very serious in the future. Right now, I happen to be involved with a project from the Asian Development Bank, where the bank is very appropriately investing a great deal of money trying to help the people of Lake Hovsgol develop a tourism industry. And the issue is, of course, which direction is it going to take? Is it going to take a regulated direction where everyone follows the best guidelines to protect the lake, or is it going to go in a direction where people ignore those problems, as they are doing right now, and causing the lake to go in a direction of very serious problems? As some of you know, Baikal is becoming more and more polluted in many areas, and what you see in the watershed now is more and more are these kinds of algae growths. And that's the kind of thing, most certainly, not only on the bottom, these are benthic algae growing on the bottom, but also up in the water, so the water turns green. Then you have the whole aspect of climate change. So we have this problem with nutrients in the lake. We also have a problem with climate change. And I think many of you have been introduced to that enough so that you appreciate what I'm referring to here. We've been doing interviews with nomadic herders and trying to get their perceptions, understand their perceptions of how climate change is affecting their lives. And these are some of the questions and the responses, just to give you an idea of how the herders. And let me say one thing. Some people, when you're in Ulaanbaatar, seem to suggest, oh, those herders, they don't know what they're doing. You know, they're just going around out there somewhere, not really protecting their environment. In fact, in my mind, it's quite the opposite. They're very concerned, and they're extremely good observers. So what is the biggest environmental impact on the lives of the herders as they responded to us? The first issue is changing weather. It's not saying weather, which we all complain about the weather. They're complaining about the weather changing. Actually, over the last few days, maybe we've had a lot of change. But overgrazing is much less a serious problem for herders as is the changing weather. And then you ask them, are the seasons changing? Trying to break down that whole idea and other aspects of what they mean by changing weather. The timing of the seasons has changed, and this is really important. As you know, for nomadic herders that are moving to the mountaintops during the winter, they start moving in autumn, they have to know when to start moving. And traditionally, they have usually started sometime in late August, early September, and remember, that's pretty far north. So they have a timing for when they move up into the mountains to get away from the cold valleys. They have a timing for when they move back down to the valleys in the spring, because they have to always worry about their water sources. So the timing of the seasons has changed, and it is creating substantial problems for the herders. The winters are milder, as you would expect. Summers are cooler, but are mixed with very warm days. And in fact, they now say that they are having heat waves in the same way that we have heat waves, and that the heat waves are burning the grass. And finally, and one of the thing that I want to emphasize here for the next couple of slides is they say the rains have changed. And they will describe to you that rains used to be a light, silky rain that might last for 2 or 3 days. Now it's coming in gushes. And you've seen that, I'm sure, yourself around here. So I'm not telling you anything that you haven't witnessed as a change. And I think if you consider all the things that have been occurring with some of these really heavy rains, where it washes cars off of Long Island Expressway, and there was one big storm that came out of Chicago and came right down to Washington area here, flooded tremendously. These are not historically common events. They may have occasionally occurred in the past, but they are increasing in frequency. For Mongolia, what you're beginning to see now are these really heavy, hard rains that are coming in, and they look like this. If you can sort of, I hope you can see, right in the center above those houses, there's a very heavy rainstorm occurring. That happens to be south of us, and we just happen to be heading that way. This kind of a rain is called, by the Mongols, is called an otter rain. Many of you fluent in Mongolian will know that term. This is the kind of rain you don't want to stand outside and feel this warm rain coming down on you. That would have been the kind of rain they would expect in the past. Now what they're finding are cold rains coming down, large drops that are coming down very rapidly on top of them, and they become very, very concerned about their children when there are children outside. Some of these rains are so hard that they can kill animals. And I'm not exaggerating that. I hope you appreciate. Just to show you now, this happens to be one of the things that the herders say was, again, we used to have these 2 or 3 day rains, half day maybe, a couple of days, light rains. Now we're having really intense rains. Overall, there's not a big increase in the amount of rainfall annually. It's just coming delivered now. Instead of a slow, gradual rain, it's coming down in torrents. It's coming down very hard, as I said. And what you see on this graph is that everything above that horizontal line, where on the top there it says otter rain, every rain above that line is an otter rain. And this is a very, very heavy rain. This is from 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012. Every year, the number on top of the line represents the length of that rain. So for example, look at 2010, you have rains that are otter rains, very hard rains that are lasting 15, 30, 15 minutes, or 10 minutes, 5 minutes, with 3 millimeters every 5 minutes occurring. Now that may not sound like very much, but that's a lot of rain coming down. And this is what the herders say as a result of our interviews and discussing it with them. The herders claim the otter rains were very damaging to their pastures, animals, and to their families while watching the herds. They're very concerned about their children, especially when they're out, because often the child will go out without a shirt on, and then you have one of these cold, drenching rains come down, and of course hypothermia then becomes a very serious problem. It's very common now. The rain eroded at the road, very intense, dangerous. The Gare was flooded, mattresses were floating, pasture covered with running water. That's not typical, certainly not historically. In previous year, these are different herders that are telling us this. In previous year, 2011, had extremely intense hard rain, killed many animals. Now, how many animals do we kill when we have one of our rains right now? One of those really heavy rains killed a lot of cars, I know that. Some people were harmed, in fact. But we had extremely hard, windy rain that knocked down many trees. Our fodder, there's food that they collect for the winter for their animals. Our fodder was blown up into the air. We lost half of the fodder. Our Gare was damaged and knocked down in 2010. And these Gares are pretty well fixed. And yet the otter rain can knock them down and blow them around. Last year at the end of July, I experienced otter burl. That's rain, otter rain. It was dangerously intense. And in most cases, these rains are ending up in floods when they get at Hovsgol, near the lake itself. If you could, on the upper left there, if you could just walk straight out, you would actually see the lake there. It's just beyond it. But what happens is when the stream following an otter rain is coming down towards the lake, it sort of backs up. The lake is acting as a dam for it, so it backs up. And the whole pasture area. This is a stream that originally is about 25 feet across, nothing more than that. And you can see two of our researchers saying they're actually looking for insects, not for fish there. So you get a perspective on what that river is like. Now look at above that and over to the right. If you look just beyond, I don't know if I can point out. If you look up in the upper right corner there, you see dots there. There are 4 yaks and a couple of horses there that got isolated out on a little knob, not recognizing, they're sitting there grazing and not recognizing that the whole valley was flooding. But I leave that in for scale, as you can compare the two researchers versus the yaks and the horses for scale. So otter rains now, all of the herders say, and I haven't put in the analysis for that, but all of the herders are saying the otter rains are much more common now. We used to have these light rains, now we're having these very intense rains. It's not always the only rain that occurs, but nevertheless it is there. This is a rainfall right here that is about 2 inches over a 2-day period. We've had some rains more than that, I'm afraid. So my concern, Bob's concern for Lake Hovsgol, and I think the concern of many people, is rather substantial and with good reason. Our research on Lake Hovsgol suggests that strict protection guidelines need to be followed as the bay and shoreline areas, the lakes, watershed are developed for tourism, and as the climate continues to change. This is critical in order to avoid serious problems in the future that would very likely include blooms of nuisance, aquatic plant growths, fish kills, more flooding, and would quickly discourage tourists from visiting the park, and all of the efforts then to build tourism would have come to nothing. Thank you.
Will you also take questions?
Yeah.
We have plenty of time for questions. I just wanted to say that because the Library of Congress is preparing a webcast of this program, any questions that you ask, you would be giving your permission to be filmed and appear in a later webcast of the program. So with that caveat, please ask questions.
How many of you have been to Lake Hovsgol? That's a good question. That's pretty good. Have you seen changes in fishing? In some cases, plants growing where they hadn't been growing before in the water. It's a slow process, a really slow process. It's only really building up now. Yeah.
I'm from Mongolia, and my question is that I visited Mongolia for months last summer, but I went to the east and I saw so much trash. I got really mad, and I started picking up by my hand, scolding everyone else around me because it was so stressful. And the same thing happened with Chovsgol, and I visited Chovsgol Lake with my family. People were just eating candy, you know how they do the offering in the mountains, the rock, and they were just eating candy or smoking and putting their trash, just cigarettes left in the lake, and I scolded them, and that's all I could do at that moment as an individual, and it's a really stressful topic for me, and I've traveled around the U.S., and I so much admire how the government takes care of its national parks and the nature, and how much education they do for the next generation, and how much it's so regulated and protected the nature is here. And what, apart from like, very slow work from the government and stuff, like, what do you think citizens of Mongolia, people like me, can do to make a difference? Because I really understand that we have to act fast before our lake is gone and before everything else is destroyed, you know? If the government is being slow, what can we do as citizens?
The story you tell was a story you could tell in the United States 50, 75 years ago. And the people of the United States finally became themselves so upset that there were national campaigns, just signs on TV and all those different types of media to tell people to care for the landscape and don't litter. So that changed the mentality, coupled with more intense litter patrolling, particularly in the parks, because I think if people see litter, they litter. If they don't see litter, they think twice about throwing the plastic bag or the cigarettes or whatever out the car window or leaving them behind. So I think it's both a role of the government to respond to that, but most importantly, you have to change the mindset of the population. And the best way to do that is national campaigns to just make people aware of what they're doing to themselves.
Also, I think like plastic is a big problem, right? That even thinking like if we should have a campaign to ban plastic or reduce plastic consumption, even production in itself and within Mongolia. I just see plastic everywhere in our country.
Yeah, that's a problem not unique to Mongolia. But again, I think even with plastic in retail and so on, if people are educated, they will strive to take care of it as opposed to just litter it. And there are campaigns in Europe and campaigns starting in the United States to just try to eliminate as much plastic from the retail stream as possible, and that's a long road to follow, but hopefully it'll be successful in those places that are trying it, and it can be tried in Mongolia as well.
You know, it may sound, by the way, that we're only worried about Lake Hovsgol, but I think Bob has said enough, and I would certainly reinforce the whole issue that what is happening there is happening in many of the parks. One of the things that really attracted me to Mongolia to begin with is that they had established a plan for protecting 15%, if not more, in fact almost 25% at one time, of their area in national parks. That goal at least has reached the 15% part now. And in each one of these parks, some of them much more protected than others because they haven't attracted people as much there. But as they do, there is an ethic that has to be recognized and established for what happens when you go into a park. Our National Park Service has done a great deal and continues to do a great deal. And in Mongolia, they will, I know, catch on and begin to do that too.
I'll give you a quick little case study. 3 years ago, we started a junior ranger program in Hovsgol, and this year we'll have it, it's already started in Hank at the northern end of the lake. After the first summer camp, a couple of the kids went to the local store in the main strip of Hovsgol and stood at the door, and when people left, they challenged them as to what they were going to do with that plastic bag or what they were going to do with that empty Coke bottle, and made them promise, basically, that they would not just throw it into the countryside. So here we've got a 6th, 7th grader who's already understanding what the issues are and starting to try to make a change. And the more that we can do that type of thing and touch one person at a time, the problem goes away. Yes?
I agree with you about the role of children in all this. It obviously worked in the United States, and I've seen it working in Mongolia. I want to ask about the possible role of the people who have the guest heirs around the side of the lake, and whether you see, because I saw the same thing in a national park in western Mongolia, in the Altai, and I keep wondering whether the role of the guides and the guest heir owners isn't a place to work.
Obviously, and they all have different motivations, and they all have different sensitivities. Some, I think, are very strong in terms of eliminating plastic in the waste stream and making sure that their guests pick up trash, and if they don't, they pick up the trash.
Toilets also.
And the toilets also, yeah. I mean, that, we didn't get into that topic, but that is one of the biggest topics at the lake and in other high tourist areas in Mongolia. The standard says no open toilets, no outhouses, so to speak. Making that transition is expensive, and because of the climate, the technology is very challenging. So the ADB project that Clyde mentioned is addressing that. How successful that first phase of that is going to be is still, I think, the jury is out. But the people around Lake Hovsgol who live there, the ADB recognizes that. We certainly recognize that in our study in 2013, that some of the biggest challenges the park was going to face were transportation issues and waste management issues. In the back.
My question is, besides regulation,
How can you incentivize the people who are developing tourism in Mongolia who have very immediate economic incentives to cause the tragedy of the commons, similar to a cap and trade system of water in South Africa or small-scale fishery photo management? Is there any type of community economic incentive in this commons to create that type of push, not just from regulation, but from kind of like self-policing and self-incentive?
I think we're starting to see that evolve. There are nuggets of groups that tourist providers in Hovsgol have created an association to address some of these issues. So I think slowly but surely you'll see, and in Hanka also, slowly but surely see some of these issues being addressed by local citizens and businesses to sustain the economic advantage that they have, because as Clyde pointed out in a couple of his slides, if it's a dump, people aren't going to want to go there. Yes?
Very interesting, of course, in the pressing presentation. You have mentioned for the tourist camps. Now, last time I visited Lake Hovsgol was in 1990, so there were no tourist camps. They did not exist, clearly, and luckily it was the most interesting time. And then with the tourist camps, overpopulation of them, and then you mentioned they needed to be 1 kilometer. The regulation is to be 1 kilometer apart, but yet they exist at 0.27 kilometers, you said. So who is the one issuing permits, or are they getting permits? Is this the local government, is my question, versus the, the Hovsgol government versus the Hanka government? And then the next question is, so what is the enforcement mechanism? How can you, enforce it? The law exists, but clearly no one's following it. Is it the partners? Is it the different government levels that can be involved? Is my first question. And the second question, if I can, is I know lots of people who have died in the lake, and personally in this, and what do you have statistics? Are people aware of the dangers of the lake deep waters? Cars and, the winter time, any time of the season, there's always kind of a time.
Have you got 2 or 3 hours? We can we can get into this. But in summary, I think one of the problems in the tourist facility development is that there are multiple layers of approval, and depending on what way you read this law versus that law, it's somewhat confusing as to who has the authority. But generally speaking, the park, the SUM governor, the AMEG governor, and the minister approve a permit. But there's also sort of a sideway exception that the SUM governor has permission to grant permits to local families for grazing. So, and then those families set up the couple of gears for a side principal or secondary economy, I'm not sure. But because of that, and there's no one point of authority, people are finding ways to drive over it, around it, and under it to get. It's going to take a strong recognition of the problem and a new commitment, basically, to start to try to sort this out. There's a new director at Lake Hovsgol. He's been there almost 2 years now. He's serious about addressing this issue, but there are a lot of factors that are forcing him to compromise and try to make things happen in the right way. But at least it's starting, and I can tell you in the history of the United States, of the national parks in the United States, 100 years ago, we had very similar type problems. So it's not like this can't be corrected.
And on the casualty?
On the which?
On the casualty data?
I'm sure it exists. We don't have it, but I do know that there are more incidences in recent times than there were historically, and you can see from the 70 or so commercial boat operators that are taking people out on the lakes. And I've heard stories that, life jackets are required, but they're homemade life jackets that don't really work. And, if you fall in a lake in Virginia, the water's relatively warm and you can survive. You fall into Lake Hovsgol, the water temperature, even in the warmest day of the year, is not warm enough to allow you to survive. And if you're way out in the middle of the lake and help can't get to you quickly, that's not going to be a good story. Thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you.
My name is Susan Meinheit, and I'm the Tibetan and Mongolian specialist in the Asian Division of the Library of Congress. I'm going to do a brief presentation on the Mongolian collection, and then I will lead you over to the display I've prepared. So please take your seats, bring your coffee. The Asian Division was founded in 1928, and it's one of the 4 area studies divisions of the Library of Congress. We are a custodial division for Asian language materials with over 4 million volumes of monographs in over 130 Asian languages. The Mongolian collection currently consists of about 11,000 monographs, 170 serial titles, almost 4,000 microfiche, 175 reels of microfilm, and about 600 volumes of rare books. The first Mongolian books came to the Library of Congress between 1893 and 1901 as gifts from the American diplomat William Woodville Rockhill. And the rare collection now has about 600 volumes, including complete reprint editions of the Mongolian Kanjur and Tanjur. This is the first Mongolian book to come to the Library of Congress, a gift from William Rockhill in 1893. It's a very beautiful Mongolian edition of the Sutra of the Great Liberation, Tarpa Chenpo in Tibetan. So in 1992, the library began a current acquisitions program for Mongolian through the New Delhi field office, which continues today. We have a vendor in Ulaanbaatar who ships books via the U.S. Embassy every month to the library. We also acquire Mongolian language material published worldwide, including China, Taiwan, Russia, and we have a very small collection of publications in Kalmyk, Buryat, and other related languages. So I've named today's display Sutras and Silver Lakes, Books and Scenes of Mongolia, in honor of this conference topic. The display focuses primarily on Hovsgol Lake and Imak. The 2 glass cases include several small sudars, about respecting nature, surrounded by images of lakes and mountains, the landscapes to which they belong. This part of the display will be on view until the end of March in case you don't have time to look at it today. Included in the display is a remote sensing map of Hovsgol National Park, which was scanned to us from originals held in the library's Geography and Map division. 2 other maps and the verser of this one are also on the open display cases. And I thank our colleagues from Geography and Map division, if they're here, for kindly loaning these items for today. Geography and Map division has a very large collection of Mongolian maps, which can be searched online using search terms, Hovsgol maps, or just Mongolia maps, and you'll get about 150 different items. Next to the map, there is a 1989 Russian atlas of the lake, Atlas of Hovsgol Lake, also from Geography and Map division. It features very colorful graphs and charts documenting studies of the lake made between 1971 and 1986. The cases also feature several small texts from our Mongolian rare book collection. These reflect Mongolians' traditional, deep respect for the environment. Included is an interesting 19th century sudar of Soch Lama Agbandorj, emphasizing the importance of respecting the spirit of nature by praying to the sky, earth, land, and country. Other small sutras offer praise to mountains, earth, and sky. The countertop display features a wide selection of books on Hovsgol, its history, culture, folk songs, legends, tourism, wildlife, wildflowers, and environmental issues. You can see the Library of Congress catalog search terms, which could be used for information on these books. And you can see we spell in a variety of different transliteration systems in the catalog. And these are some of the subject headings you could search for further information. These are all established Library of Congress subject headings: Legends, Mongolia, Hovsgol, Imak, Tovels, Mongolia, Darhat, Mongolian people, folklore, etc., etc. And if you're interested in more information on our Mongolian collection, you can start by searching here. And these are also subject headings that I used in preparing the display: wildlife conservation, biodiversity conservation Mongolia, ecosystem management Mongolia. You can see we have a very extensive collection: reindeer herding, etc. The display also features several books from the library's law library on Mongolian laws for environmental protection. They also can be searched by the various Library of Congress subject headings here. And finally, the display includes a few miscellaneous books related to other topics in the conference. For example, the travel book by Beatrice Bulstod, and books on the history of Mongolian television, a book on Buryat poetry for a visitor from Buryatia. And all of these books are available in the Asian Reading Room, which is located across the Great Hall from here, Jefferson LJ 150. We're open Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 5. This is our website. And now I'd like to, if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And then if you could finish your refreshments, and we could go over and take a look at the display. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.